Okay, let's start. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to sixth live session for the course Usability Engineering. My name is Neelarnab Dutta. I am a PMRF fellow from the Department of Design, IIT Guwahati. So, in this particular class, I will be discussing about key concepts from week 6 lecture videos. Uh, I'll be helping you in clarifying your doubts related to the key concepts. So please be interact with me. So I would like to be this session a bit interactive. So you can use the message box as well as you can use your microphone to communicate with me directly. Okay. Okay. So let's discuss what we learned in our last class. So in the last class we discussed about various user study techniques which were mostly qualitative in nature. So we discussed about interviews. We discussed about three types of interviews: unstructured, semi-structured, and structured. So unstructured are basically useful when we go in a contextual inquiry. We have inquiries in real time, and then we ask the user without pre-planning the set of questions. Similarly, semi-structured questions are those interviews where we have set of predefined interview questions. However, the scope of the interview extends beyond these initial set of questions. So these are basically the questions which will ignite the flow of conversation, and then depending upon where the conversation flow, we may ask a fresh set of questions. The third kind of interviews, structured interviews, which are mainly limited by few questions where we need information like, for example, if we're looking for demographic data, if we ask someone like, what is your age? What is your age? What is your job profile? So in certain interviews where we need information only on specific set of questions, we can go for structured interviews. Then we learned about critical incident technique, which is a way of conducting uh, interviews or other set of inquiries where we ask the user to recall and describe a time in the past where that particular action impacted positively or negatively. Okay, so for example, if you ask a particular interview question like that, okay, when you have used a mobile application, or when you have used the uh, Axis Bank credit card payment feature. So this is like a question. So the question is when you have okay. So this question is a generic question, which is not a critical incident question. So a user can give generic information like, okay, I use uh, Axis Bank credit card payment many times, or I occasionally use. So the information will be very um, generic and may not be useful for your findings. But if you ask the question in such a way, for example, if you ask like, when is the last time you used and you failed to pay your bills, or when you use this particular credit card payment feature and there are incident of some errors. Okay, so these kind of question actually bring back like the memories of past past memories where actually a interview can go and explain and the information in more narrative way, and you will get more detailed information rather than information which were oftenly forgotten or generic in nature. Another kind of user study we discussed about focus group. which are generally group discussion with experts. So there are different types of focus groups. Questionnaire survey is something where we go for fixed set of questions and we conduct large surveys. So we here will look for sample size. That means we want to identify in a user group, like for example, how many people are satisfied with this particular feature, okay, and how many are dissatisfied with this particular feature. So when this kind of questions were asked among a population, some will give, okay, I am dissatisfied, someone will give, I am dissatisfied, few will give, I'm satisfied but not very much. So you will have a lot of information, and then by analyzing these set of different information, you can conclude like whether that particular feature is interesting or not. We also discuss about task analysis, especially more specifically hierarchical task analysis, where we break down a task. We give a user to perform certain task, and then we ask him to uh, break down the task into subtasks. So basically, if for example, if we ask someone to buy a movie ticket, you can actually break down the task into individual set of initial goals, and then those individual goals can have further subtasks. So this particular hierarchy of task analysis is what we are looking for in a hierarchical task analysis user study. Then we discuss about workflows, which are of two kinds: pluralistic and cognitive. So pluralistic is mainly the kind of workflows where we consider multiple user, like stakeholder, user, the other like developer, and try to get their viewpoint on the workflow of certain features. Okay. Similarly, cognitive workflow is about identifying uh, scenarios where user face issues, and by observing or by asking the user later, like why you have stuck in that particular phase, you can get to know about the blocks, the mental blocks, or the cognitive processing blocks that user faces while executing any task. So that can be identified using this sort of um, user study technique. Then we discussed about think aloud protocol, which is like uh, thinking aloud, basically speak while performing any activity. That means um, when you ask someone to perform certain task, for example, if you give a Axis Bank mobile banking application and ask him to pay their credit card bills using that particular application, then the user have to speak also his thought process while doing the activities. So this way we'll be able to know what are the key decision points, what are the evaluation, cognitive evaluation phases, how the user make decisions, what are his mental models about the interaction, about the features in that particular application. All those information we can identify based on the, the way the particular person speak while doing his activities. So this is very helpful to identify uh, those informations which are not visible, you know, in real life, which are mostly mental actions, mental activities that actually goes inside the head of a user. Then we discussed about card sorting, which is basically trying to affinitize multiple labels and try to see where a user, how a user group multiple concepts. So these are techniques useful for creating categories for websites For example, in a website you have hierarchies like about, you have for example you have like by, then you have content, like that. So you give all these information, the smaller activities or labels in the form of small sheet of informations, where you ask the users to affinitize or to categorize these into specific groups, and you here try to identify the mental model of the users, how they think the particular elements needs to be organized in a particular way. So you do this for many user, for different user profiles, and then you collect the aggregate understanding of these groups, which helps you to design your websites. So this is what is card sorting is. Then we discussed about tree testing, which is basically testing of a particular hierarchy of information. So basically card sorting is about building the information architecture of your website. For example, tree testing is more about evaluating whether the positioning of a particular element or label is accurate or not. So what you do, you ask the user to navigate for particular task, and you evaluate and or you watch whether the user can identify that particular feature or not. So this is how tree testing is done. So these are various qualitative user study techniques we discussed in our last class. Then finally we discussed about how we choose between these various methods. So we discussed about a three-dimensional framework, which which actually break down, uh, which categorize or break down various these qualitative user study techniques into four quadrants and under three attributes. So we try to see whether we are looking for attitudinal or behavioral data. So we have the axis here where we look for whether the kind of information we are looking for are attitudinal or behavioral. For example, if we want to know about uh, this particular application, where how this particular application of credit card payment works, probably we'll be looking for behavioral information. So we choose some technique where actually we can observe the particular use case of that particular feature. Similarly, if we want to know about the reports of the various pain points about this particular feature, probably would like to know about the people's perception about this particular application. So then in that case we can go for those user studies where we collect information from experts in the form of for example focus group interview or focus group discussion or semi-structured interview. So these are the this is how we decide whether we need to go for attitudinal information or behavioral information. Similarly, when we come to know about what people say, sometimes in our research we may look for only qualitative information, or sometimes we are looking for quantitative information. For example, if we are looking for, if we ask a specific question like what are the features or what are the good points that that encourage or that create interest among the users of this particular application. So we are looking for attributes which are qualitative in nature, and we are looking for those features which make this particular application very popular. So for identifying such features which are qualitative in nature, so we will do some attitudinal study or qualitative study. Okay. Similarly, when we are looking for what is the most common feature that user use in this particular application, then probably we'll have to look for the number of counts, number of hits user make in this particular application, the way the users move inside this particular application. So in that case, we may look for quantitative information. So where we try to collect information on specific quantitative features. Okay. So this particular three-dimensional framework basically help you identify the specific user study technique for your study. So if you look for how many or how much, you go for quantitative. If you go for why and how to fix, then you go for qualitative. Then again, if you keeping that in common, if you say like you want to actually see or what people do, then you go for behavioral study. And if you just want to know what people say, then you go for attitudinal study. So this is how we choose. Okay, so in today's lecture we'll be discussing about quantitative user study methods. Okay, so before we go to specific quantitative methods, first we need to understand, so what is the difference between quantitative and qualitative methods. So what do you mean by quantitative and qualitative? Yes. Suppose here is a scenario where this is, for example, scenario of a bank, and we are studying things related to a banking application. Now, what do you think are the qualitative information, and do you think are the quantitative information? I mean, how do you decide? Okay, so qualitative user study mainly focuses on observing findings and attitudinal informations. Most of the information that we collect via any of the qualitative uh, techniques, for example, whether you talked about interview or contextual inquiry, all these generate information which are experience level data and subjective in nature. That means from person to person the information varies, and the nature of the informations are also like descriptive. It's more like, if you want to analyze those information, you need to actually convert those information into some sort of no, that some sort of data which can be used later for analysis. For example, if you conduct interview, you need to take videography, or you need to create or record audios, so that later you can transcribe those audio data into text, and then those text information you can analyze for further analysis. So there is always a requirement of converting data, raw data, into information which can be easily analyzable. Okay, so this data conversion is a requirement for qualitative user studies. However, in quantitative study, we already know about specific feature or measurable unit, and we conduct the study to get to know the either the percentage or a number or count or specific value. Okay, value or count, okay, or percentage of these variables for our study. So here the data is already available in a format which can be easy to analyze, and we do not need any sort of conversation later. So can you give an example of, if this is a particular scenario of using particular bank application, what will be the nature of a qualitative data or quantitative data? Okay. So example of qualitative user data from this particular scenario may be the pain points. Pain points. So you conduct an interview, then the user will let you know about various features, and then he will say, okay, I do not like this particular feature, and that particular features have these pain points. So probably that particular feature is cash management, and the person gives his opinion about uh, it's bad or it's very bad. Okay, like that. Similarly, the nature of quantitative information that you can generate from this particular scenario can be um, the number of uh, times this particular person actually access this particular cache management feature. So you here you are counting the access to cache management feature. See, the nature of the data is different. Though you are studying the same scenario, but depending upon your inquiry, the nature of the data output is different. So when you are looking for his experience or his attitude about the use of this particular cache management feature, then he will give data in the form of bad or very bad. Okay. Similarly, when as for quantitative information, when you want to understand like how many times this particular person actually use this particular feature, then probably you need to collect the log information. Okay, and then understand like, okay, in a particular day he used this particular feature probably 17 times. Okay, so that's an example. So the same data for a qualitative study will give you, so if cache management is a particular feature, then the output for a qualitative study can be bad, very bad, good, like that. Similarly, for a quantitative data cache management, probably a count 17 times. Now here's a question for you. So can we plot these two data types? See, if these are variables or if these are certain features, then there should be some way how we actually know these things in a mathematical way. So the difference between qualitative and quantitative data lies on whether you are able to create a scale for these features or not. For example, when we use quantitative data, we have specific scale. For example, number of counts will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like 17, and then it will be mapped with something like a time. Okay, so we have a specific count. Okay, 17, and this particular feature, the count, is actually the only values for these particular features are equidistant. That means from 3 to 4 the distance is 1, similar to from 4 to 5 the distance is 1. Similarly, if we talked about another quantity like for example weight or mass, when you say 5 kg, then 6 kg or 4 kg, we actually have uh, uniform distance between these two particular units. Okay. However, in case of qualitative data, it is hard to determine the distance between two such features. For example, when we say bad, very bad, and very, very bad, or worse. So, do you actually get to know what is the distance between bad to very bad and or very bad to worse. So these informations are vague in nature, and that's why we generally do not plot qualitative information. Instead, we try to collect the statistical significance of such data. So statistical significance implies to both qualitative as well as quantitative data. Okay, so what does that mean? So let me introduce you to the topic of something called normal distribution. Okay, so a normal distribution is a curve like this. So this is the normal curve distribution. So what it says is that when you measure particular feature, okay, the distribution of the maximum, okay, the mean distribution always lies at the center. That means what? For example, when we observe in this particular, for example, this is a particular bank application case, and we see particular case where this particular person faced difficulty in identifying specific feature. For example, here's a button, and this particular person could not find this particular button. Now that incidence that could not find is a qualitative data. Okay, now visibility, none, quality could not find. Now we need to identify whether that particular observation, whether it's just an error or it's a rare event where this particular person only cannot see, but usually others people can easily recognize that particular feature. So in order to understand that, we need to go for larger sample size. Okay. That means we need to conduct that particular user study for more than one person. Whether we talked about qualitative user study, whether we go for interviews, or whether we go for contextual inquiry, or we go for some survey information, we need to increase our sample size in order to understand the frequency of this particular error. So a normal distribution curve define the frequency of occurrence of a particular event. Okay, so what it signifies is that it says if a particular incident happens on a regular manner, that means it falls under average incidences, and a large section of population, which is the number of people, will have these issues. Okay. However, when there's a rare event, we will probably have a very small number of population, which or times or number of account of events which happen uh, in this particular scenario. That means this particular incidence, if it happens in a regular basis, the frequency or the count of that particular uh, occurrence fall in this particular interval. So most people experience this. So this is most, that means this has a higher count. However, the incidents which are rare in nature, they will have a lower count. And if something is rarest incidents, that it will fall somewhere here. That means it happens only few times, and that is not a usual occurrence. Probably it is accidental or occurrence or error. So in order to understand whether a particular observation is recurring or it signifies certain importance, we need to understand statistical significance of particular feature or particular event. So that's why we need to know this particular normal distribution curve. Okay, clear? Now the question comes, when to use qualitative and when to use quantitative. So we already discussed this, like when we are looking for qualitative and qualitative data, then we use this thing. But when we need quantitative data, then but not every time it is possible for the designer to know in advance, like for that the data that will be generated will be qualitative in nature. Or sometimes what happens, uh, you come across in a particular contextual inquiry, you go for interview and suddenly during the interview you try to get information which are quantitative in nature. Then suddenly you need to start collecting those information as a part of even interview. Okay, so these things happen in a real scenario. So in a particular design project, okay, when you try to uh, evaluate a particular scenario and then try to design something, evaluate the design, the nature of the user study may change from qualitative to quantitative. Sometimes it will be both, it can be mixed method also. So for example, a typical website design uh, stages can be considered like, first is evaluating the particular initial website or the application. So in order to evaluate the kind of uh, user study methods that can be like observation, that can be interviews, right, that can be also surveys, it can be also like try to get the log data and want to see how people actually navigate through the particular website, where are the maximum clicks, where are the least number of clicks. So those are also some ways how you can collect information. So when you try to evaluate anything, you often combine either you know you can choose quantitative or qualitative depending upon your objective, and also you can combine both as a mixed method approach. Okay? But when you actually go for, after identifying this initial set of findings, when you then identify certain requirements, then you go for redesigning the particular application or website, then you use qualitative approaches, because here this is formative in nature. You are trying to collect information. For example, you try to affinitize information in your design, like using card sorting, or you are trying to conceptualize important features in together. So all those come under qualitative methods. Then when you go from design phase to again evaluation phase, you again choose techniques which are either qualitative or quantitative. For example, qualitative can be something like um, conducting task analysis, or you can go for walkthroughs and try to identify how is the new interface, how is the redesign. Again, you can go for quantitative approach, where you will have a set of predefined matrices, and then you do usability study to see how user perform in this particular uh, redesign. You compare, then again you go for redesign. So depending upon the requirement and the stage at which you are in a design process, the nature of the user study can vary. So if you are looking for the problem, pain point, task, then it's mostly qualitative in nature. However, you can also combine quantitative. But if you do evaluation, okay, uh, this can be also both qualitative and quantitative. So if you go for evaluation, it can be either usability study. So you will have set of predefined matrices, for example, time to execute, or whether the task is finished or not. So all those information will be quantitative in nature. Similarly, it can be task analysis, which will be qualitative. It can be cognitive walkthrough, which will be again qualitative. So when you evaluate something, it can be both qualitative as well as quantitative. Okay. Okay. Depending upon the requirement in a particular design stage, you can have either qualitative as well as quantitative. That's what we understood. Now, whether it is qualitative or quantitative, the very first thing that we need to keep in mind that the nature of the study that you conduct for particular requirement has to be valid. So validity of a study is important when you design your particular experiment. So what do you mean by experiment design? So experiment design means when you decide like, okay, uh, I'm looking for this, I need to finding of this nature, and for that I will be doing a interview, okay, followed by survey, and then at the end I will be do thematic analysis. So this particular design of various methods, this particular arrangement or sequence of methods that you used for particular to conduct particular study is what we call as experimental design. So we design a particular experiment, and you plan basically various stages how you will be collecting the data. Okay, so they are at particular phase it can be quantitative user study, at particular phase it can be qualitative. Now the idea is to make a particular experiment design valid. So for that we consider two important aspects. One is external validity, the other one is internal validity. Okay, so external validity is represents is about representing the particular target audience. So when you try to conduct a particular, for example, contextual inquiry, you need to make sure that you are actually observing someone, or you are doing or interviewing someone who is actually representative of the target audience. So you do not interview someone else. Okay. Similarly, the way you conduct that particular study, it should reflect the natural condition. So the study should reflect how the task is done in a particular way in a natural setting. So if we do not do that, and if we bring that person to your setting or your home, and then you ask that particular person to perform that particular task, probably the environment changes, the scenario changes. So your entire task analysis may give wrong information because you have tempered the natural setting of executing that particular task. So you need to look for external validity. Okay. Similarly, internal validity means your experiment should not favor any particular condition. That means when you are conducting that particular study, it should not include any sort of bias. for example, if you bring a novice user and then you use a expert user and say and take their inputs in common to derive information on your requirements, then that will be a biased information. Because what happens here, the information from these two setting may vary, because the task analysis of a novice user and the expert user may be different. Okay, that's the reason why we need to consider, we need to give the task to specific user group and see then the difference between the requirements, and then only we should be moving ahead with our requirement analysis or design decisions. So this is what is important as a part of internal validity. Okay, so let's discuss about few quantitative user techniques. The very first one is quantitative usability testing. So as discussed, just briefly here. So what we do in quantitative uh, usability testing, consider we collect the time as well as whether success or fail in particular activities. So for example, if we ask a user to perform particular activity, for example, if you ask him to buy a laptop from Amazon, so that's a particular task. Now here we are evaluating, we are basically usability testing the application Amazon. Okay, now we observe the time, so we record here the time of executing this particular activity, that is buying a laptop from Amazon, as well as we also try to capture whether the person is able to complete that particular task or not. So when we do this particular thing for a larger sample size, we'll be able to know whether a particular flow of task or a particular feature in a website like Amazon is proper or not. Okay, so if that time interval really varies, for example, if we consider here the normal distribution, that curve, if we identify the time that that requires for completing this particular task is almost same for a large population, that means that particular feature is correct. But if we identify like the time requiring for this particular feature actually varies among users, that means that particular feature is not a proper feature, or there are some issues with navigation, so you need to recorrect the interface as well as the interaction features. So these are mainly useful when we try to understand uh, task-based activities. Okay. Another quantitative user technique is web analytics. So here we ask people to navigate inside or across a website, and then we do not give any specific goals at the initial level, but we try to see here how people move inside that particular website, like what they look for. Okay, so what they are viewing in this particular website. Okay, so this means we here recognize whether our design or choice of particular icon or particular label are accurate or not. If we want something to be noticeable and users are not viewing that, a group of users are not viewing that, that means whether we need to redesign our information architecture, or we need to work on our visual graphic information, so that the informations are readable and legible for a large group of population. Similarly, we can also identify where people move, how they move, and where they go by identifying various clicks that they perform while navigating in the particular web. Okay, then we can also get to know about the information about the visitors. If you have some login information and if you collect information on the user profiles, then you can also get to know about how particular professional people actually navigate. So for example, if you have a visitor profile who are from academics, and then you have a different profile who are mainly the employees, okay, then probably you will see different trends how they move inside this particular website. Probably they look for different set of information, that's why they have different navigational pattern. So all those things we analyze in a web analytics user study. Okay, so this is what is web analytics. Then what we have is A/B testing. So A/B testing is a comparative analysis. It's a user study where we compare two design options. For example, we have two websites or two applications, and for example, here we have uh, a user interface A, B. Then we give 50 people, assign 50 people here, 50 people there, and then we try to see how people move from here to here. So basically, which particular feature people like. Okay. So basically, here we try to compare how people find a particular feature among these two particular designs. Okay. So this is to evaluate a better user interface by comparing the various features. So when we are comparing various features, that means it's a multivariate testing. Then we need to look for data where the data includes various information like you have the time, then success, then ability to choose or change. So all set of data may involve in comparing to these two interfaces. So this is how we do A/B testing. uh, Next is card sorting. So card sorting we already discussed in our qualitative user study research in class, but we can also use card sorting for quantitative measurements. So basically, here we look for the frequency of categorization. So basically, when we you give uh, the same task of card sorting to multiple users, or for to a large user group, probably each will have different mental model. However, when you combine the information from each of them, you will probably get to know about the commonality among their mental model of the architecture. Okay. So in order to understand that, what we need to know, like, about the count of how many people actually did this particular arrangement. For example, we can count under about us how many. For example, if you have 50 user, out of 50, about the university is under about us. So 50, out 40 people put this particular label under about us. So occurrence of about us under, oh sorry, about the university, the occurrence of about the university under about us is 40. So that means it is 80% probability. Similarly, if you see library under about us is like 10%. So 10% people only select library under about us. That's why it's not a common feature, and we can reject that particular count. So this is how we can use card sorting to get to know about the mental model of population by identifying uh, the 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 pattern based on the percentage of occurrence. Okay. uh, Next is tree testing. So tree testing we already discussed. This is also similar to card sorting, but card sorting we use generally for to create the information architecture. Tree testing, what we do, we use tree testing to analyze or to evaluate the position as well as the occurrence of particular level inside a information architecture in a hierarchy. Okay. So this generally we used as a qualitative study when we deal with one or two user. So we check in a qualitative measurement, what we check whether that particular person is able to uh, identify a particular level inside a tree or not. However, we can also use this particular technique as a quantitative method when we use this with a higher sample size of user, and we count like how many people actually could identify this particular feature. That means here we are again talking about count, which are quantitative information. So the qualitative information, actually many qualitative techniques can be converted into quantitative data by just based on counting the occurrence of that particular information. So whether we talked about interview or whether you talked about thematic analysis, so all those are qualitative user study. However, based on the count or frequency of occurrence of particular theme or particular information, we can also use those as quantitative data. Okay. Survey and questionnaire we already discussed. This is again a quantitative information. So the nature of the survey data are like questionnaire, where this is example of a scale, okay, where we ask the user what they think about the difficulty of this particular application. So the user give a particular rating like 2. Similarly, another user can give a rating like 3. So when you actually do that particular survey for a large population, then you can get to know about a normal distribution curve, where you will know that a large portion of the people probably have selected the option 3, and a very low portion of the population actually choose the option 5. That means this particular app is neither easy and neither difficult to use. So this is how you analyze the survey data. Then desirability study is the kind of uh, qualitative come quantitative study, where actually we give the user particular product to use and then ask them the particular characteristics or particular feature which they think are interesting in that particular product. So for example, here's an example. So when you ask someone to describe a flat design, so flat means this is a particular flat thing, so you have no color variation, this is like a flat one single monotonous color. So you have inform if you have information or data from different age groups. So the young adults, they give the information like A flat design is something which is fresh and professional. That means they are talking about something which is neat, right? Which is very clean looking. So that's what they define as flat design. They also define like flat designs are calm, they are a little bit boring, and they are very familiar. Similarly, the older adults, they have a different perspective, and they say like flat designs probably are easy to create. That's why they are cheap, but they are also look old because they lack vibrant colors. That's why probably they are look old. They are calm. They are a little bit boring and familiar. So like this, various attitudinal information associated with product attributes can be collected using desirability study. So we can use this particular study to identify what sort of features they are looking for in a particular application. So you ask this particular question, and then probably if you have certain objective, like for example here it's a flat design. If you have objective like uh, easy easy to use, so different people may have different perspective on easy to use. So people may give opinions like, so for them easy to use means it is fast. Some people may give easy to use means less number of step. Okay, some people may give the information should be clear. Okay, so likewise we can collect attributes about product using this sort of user study. So this is called desirability study. Then we have eye tracking. So you already have seen, probably might have seen the two videos of eye tracking, where a particular instrument is used to track the pupils and try to locate the person's viewing angle and try to see where the particular person navigate through his eyes during particular activity. So generally these are useful when you try to analyze web applications or mobile applications, and you use this particular setup, and then you ask the user to navigate for a particular feature. And if the user can directly identify a particular feature, that means your design is correct. However, if his movement of eye go here there and then finally reach that particular location, that means it was not easy for a particular person to identify that particular feature. And you again need to do this in large sample study. So we need to collect information from more than 30 people, and then you need to look for information whether the positioning of a particular feature is correct or not. So mainly these eye tracking devices are useful to understand or to check the positioning as well as the size of particular feature. Okay. Okay. So far we have discussed about various techniques, quantitative in nature, which are used for collect user information. Now, in the previous class, we discussed about qualitative information as well as the qualitative user study techniques. In this class, we discussed about quantitative information as well as the way we can collect quantitative informations. Now, after going through a user study, what we need to do is we need to synthesize the user research data. And how to do that effectively so that those can be used meaningfully in a later case. So that's what is the agenda for this particular subject. So we need to synthesize the data in some scientific way so that the data can be used later for our design purpose. So you might have remember in the contextual inquiry phase, we discussed about mind mapping. So where we discussed about flow model, sequence model, cultural model. So all these are nothing but the way of synthesizing particular information and then storing them in a more recognizable format. Okay. So similarly, these are some generic techniques. These are not only related to contextual inquiry, but these are related to all sort of uh, qualitative, quantitative, attitudinal, as well as behavioral study. So these are some ways how you can actually capture information about particular user study. So very important, one of the very important thing is persona creation. Okay, so when we do a user study, this particular word have the user involved in it. Now by user I don't mean the end user, but it can be all sort of stakeholders who are part of this particular context, who are part of a particular context or scenario. Now when you do user study, probably you want to memorize that particular person, and you want to know, or you want to collect information about various requirements and various problems they face. So when you do various user study technique like contextual inquiry or interview, you get to know about people's viewpoint, people's mental model, um, and that can vary among user groups. Okay. And when you finally need to bring all these things down for your analysis, it's very difficult if you consider them separately. So for that, you consider persona creation. So personas are nothing but fictitious representation of target users. And what you do in persona creation, you try to bring all personas, all people or stakeholders need, concern, goal, and their information about their backgrounds like age, gender, behavior into one particular sheet of information. So what we represent here is a persona, which is not a real person, but it's a representation of various stakeholders that you have came across probably in a user study. So what we include in a persona creation process or in a persona is a person's face that I know that let us to understand the particular race or ethnicity or particular age, gender of a particular person. Then we also discuss about his background. So this background is nothing but a common understanding of what the particular user profile. So their motivation, the problem they face in general. So if you have stakeholders who have different problems associated, generally we create different personas. So for example, in a particular contextual inquiry, if you do it in a clinical scenario, you may have doctors as separate stakeholder, then you have patient, right? Patient as separate stakeholder. Now both have different perspective and different pain points for particular uh, scenario. For example, if they discuss about a particular clinical scenario like cancer management, the patient also have different pain points because he is the sufferer. So he have different viewpoints, pain points. Again, the doctor who is trying to cure the patients have a different viewpoints and different pain points. His pain points probably more from the institution side, but the person who is actually suffering, who, and whose clinical information we are discussing about is probably the real person who is actually suffer, who is actually experiencing that particular disease state. So the need as well as the problem description of the stakeholders can vary. So depending upon the stakeholders, we create different personas. So if we create this particular person as a patient, then we here discuss about all set of uh, you know background information, motivation, problem description, needs about patient. Okay, so this particular person should represent all the patient across a geography. Okay, similarly, if we are talking about a doctor, then we should have a doctor's face here, and that particular doctor should represent the scenario where we conducted particular user study, and it should also discuss about all sort of information which represent that particular clinician or doctor. Now we need to understand why we do persona creation. First of all, persona creation let us assume a common set of features uh, among a population. So we make assumptions and we uh, gather information about the user, and then we bring them into one small piece of information. So this helps us to analyze the information in a more comprehensive manner. The another important requirement why we do persona creation is to focus on our design by considering a particular stakeholder profile. Okay, so if we have personas, like three personas for three different stakeholders, it is easy for us to understand their requirements in our design instead of considering all user profiles that we have interviewed or we have encountered in our contextual inquiry. So that's why designing features or designing product using persona is useful. The third important aspect of persona creation is to encourage designers to be empathetic with the user profiles. That's why we create personas, so that the particular designer or the team who is working in that particular problem area should not forget the face of that particular person, should not forget his problems, his description, should not forget his background and what he quotes. Okay, so these are the various reasons why we use personas. So we need to know how to create personas first. So a ideal persona, so when we create a persona, the very first thing is like we focused on the present. Okay, so we try to see what presently that particular person is facing, what that particular user profile or stakeholder group is facing, instead of bringing our own judgments or own perspective. We should consider the present scenario, and we should collect those information only which are visible from our contextual inquiry or from our user study. Now again, this should be context specific. So context by context, I mean whether we are talking about a particular patient or we are talking about nurse. So they have different context. So a nurse job is different, their activities are different. Similarly, a patient job is different, patient activities are different. So they should specify the context. Okay, they should be unique in the sense when you have multiple personas, so you have different stakeholders, so these personas should be unique because if we consider them as different stakeholders, that means they have different objectives and different activities within the particular scenario. That's why each persona represent a group of stakeholders, and those groups should be unique in nature from each other. Use real data, so whatever you identify, use only those information. Do not take additional information from interviews to create personas. Avoid biases, so do not include your own biases or biases from interviews to create your personas. So this is very important, otherwise you will not know the exact uh, user profile and their pain points when we actually create personas. Okay. So the very first thing what we do when we create personas is to start with identifying features or characteristics that we observe when we do user research activities. Okay. These activities needs to be clustered together and to see the clear categories and findings. Okay. So common pieces of information that we include are like name, gender, photo. So if for particular study you are looking for gender specific information, then you can include gender, otherwise it's not required. Similarly, a photo will help you understanding that particular person in terms of age, his socioeconomic condition. A name or age probably will let you know about his ethnicity, probably his demographic information. So all those things um, may help you in your particular task analysis or user study. Now you can use also a tagline describing what they do in their real life. Okay, so you can use a tagline like nurse helping patient. So that means using a tagline you are describing their day-to-day activities. Similarly, you can include their experience level. You can also include their goals, okay, their pain points, okay. So all sort of information that are helpful in defining the problem as well as the need, you should include those in your persona creation process. So this is how a final persona should look when you design a particular persona. But again, depending upon your design objective, the content can be different. Need problem descriptions are very common because any design objective, when you are trying to do certain design, that means there has to be some problem or certain needs that you want to fulfill. But motivation then background can differ, so you can also include different information like activities. Okay, so depending upon your requirement, you can actually choose the content for a particular person. Okay. So next thing is mapping. So we discussed in our contextual inquiry stage, like at the time when we discussing about contextual inquiry. So we discussed about four types of mapping. We discussed about flow model, then cultural model, then we discussed about sequence model. Actually, it was five. Then artifacts and physical model. So all these are nothing but the way to analyze the information and bring them into one particular piece or one particular sheet so that those can be used later for further analysis and for design purpose. Now that was for contextual inquiry, but here we will be discussing some common techniques which will help us to map information that we collect in a user study. So whether we collect it through an interview or task analysis uh, or survey information. So any sort of user study techniques can be used, and those can be later converted into these sort of maps. So these maps help you to collect information from different user profiles. So here the user means the people who are engaged in the particular design activity. So probably you have a team of designers or engineers or researchers who are from different background. Now when they are part of a user study, or when they conducted user study, they have their own lenses of looking at things, and they have their own observations. But if we consider their individual observations, then probably it will be more similar, like their own perception, or that may include some personal biases. However, when you map those information, the individual information in on a common space, then probably those biases will be nullified and you will get to know about information which everyone agrees upon. Okay, so that's the reason why also mapping is done. Now these are various elements which are generally considered for mapping. So mapping is again similar to the previously discussed flow model, cultural model, etc. So first discuss about this element, then we'll go into those mapping methods. So what we look for to map from user are these. So we look for physical elements like the artifacts, the tools, the devices that are used in the particular activity by the user. So this is again, you can consider these elements in the artifact model in the contextual inquiry. Similarly, behavior information like what actions they took, what activities they perform, what are their tasks, all those informations comes under behavioral elements. Then cognitive information you can collect from think aloud protocol or cognitive walkthroughs. So those can be thought process, viewpoints, opinions. So those are also considered as elements for mapping purpose. Then you have emotional elements, which are their feeling, desire, state of mind. Probably you can observe them in their facial features. Then there are needs, user needs, goals. Okay, then challenges, pain points, then context, the setting. So we collect all these information. So we identify and segregate all this information from our data uh, generated from a user study, and then we use these information for mapping purpose. Similarly, when we describe organization, so these are the organizational elements. So we try to identify the touch points, like then we try to identify offerings like products, services. Then we try to identify processes, challenges, operations, matrices, evaluation, opportunities, goals, strategies. So when we try to define a particular scenario, it's not the user whom we need to describe. It's also the service, the organization, the setting where the particular user is engaged in. Okay, so to describe both user elements as well as organized elements, we use these mapping techniques. But before we go ahead with mapping techniques, we need to uh, do we need to make specific decisions how we do this sort of mapping. So there are three important decisions that we need to make before going ahead with the mapping process. The first thing is, if we are looking for whether we are looking for current or future information. So a current information help us to analyze a particular context or scenario, how a user or a particular organization behave, or how a particular task has been analyzed or task has been executed. So a current information is more useful when you are trying to define a problem or a scenario. So this will let you identify your breakpoints, so the issue areas, and then probably you will have list of problems or requirements. And always avoid uh, the inputs which are more like your desire, which are future, which are that which are information that you want to achieve as a part of particular process or activity. And sometimes we have the tendency to include those in our mapping. So we have our own biases. We also have our own expectation, so we include those information also in our current mapping. So always avoid that when we are actually trying to identify problems or requirements. But those are also useful when we map something about a user, uh, about various tasks or workflow. And when we map those from the perspective of what it should be, what should be the desired one, then probably you can consider the scenarios which are future scenarios or which are desired scenarios. So those can be used as a target set of actions or features or activities. Okay, so this gives you problem. Probably that particular mapping will help you in understanding the gap behind the desired scenario and the present scenario. Okay. So this is the very first thing that we need to consider. Then the other thing is hypothesis versus research. So hypothesis means assumptions. Now are assumptions became concrete when we actually prove it via our study. So when we mm, do mapping, when you do mind mapping, so many times we have tendency to put information based on our assumptions. Okay, so if we think, okay, there should be a connection between this, so we assume when we connect. If we think, okay, credit card payment delay is associated with poor bank service, we connect it. But those are like personal biases, assumptions, so we should not do it in that way. For realistic data, we need to consider information from our real data, which are mostly research based. So we need to plot, or we need to do mapping mostly based on what is actually available as real data. So that only represents a real information about the present scenario. However, we can also use hypothesis when we try to understand the attitudinal information about certain features or certain factors, how they may impact one another. So to analyze those, you can actually get experts opinion and then try to create those information, though those are based on assumptions or they are perspectives, attitudinal in nature. Those can be considered as valuable information sometimes to go ahead later for detailed research. Okay. The third consideration that we need to do is whether we are going for low fidelity mapping or we are going for high fidelity mapping. So low fidelity mapping means mapping when we use simple tools like sticky notes, which are often changeable, which may encounter change. Again, these are quick to create, and you can use a large portion of user group to make decisions on specific mapping and specific connections. However, high fidelity ones are those which are later created, mostly graphically. So these are detailed one, and this takes time to create information which are very accurate, and there are less chances of change. So only at a later stage of your mapping you go for high fidelity mapping. Okay, so generally we start with low fidelity mapping, and we reiterate our mapping, and if we are satisfied with our mapping, then we validate that, and later only once those gets validated we convert them into high fidelity maps. Okay. Okay, so let's discuss about four kind of maps. So there are four kind of UX mapping. The very popular one is empathy mapping. So empathy mapping is about understanding users mindset. So it's about understanding a particular user type, okay, his shared understanding, and his belief, his mental model about particular scenario. So empathy mapping, we create a two-dimensional map like this, which have four quadrants, and we segregate informations that we collected as these four. So we collected information about what the user says about a particular scenario. We also collect information about what we segregate. Basically we segregate and group them at one particular place, and we say these are the information that the particular user think, then these are the particular feelings that the user came across, then this is what they did in a particular inquiry, contextual inquiry or user study. So this way we can understand a person's mental model, his behavior, like what, when you ask them, they are again task oriented, you have to give them certain tasks, and while performing their task or after completing their task you can do interviews, or you can do other quantitative study to collect information on these four things. So all the information that the user say are goes at one place, all the information that the person say, oh sorry, person does goes at one place. Similarly what the person feel, probably you have collected those using think alert protocol, so you collect them at one place, and similarly the information that they think are also collected in one place. Now by doing that what you are able to do is to understand whether what the person saying is actually the same as what he is doing. So is there any correlation? So by analyzing these things independently, we try to understand later, like a particular scenario, to identify specific pain points, like where the particular pain points exist, where the particular problem exists in a task. So, for example, if the user while operating a particular application, if user complains about his doing, like oh this I'm not liking this, so he's saying like I'm not liking this, but actually he's doing is something different, he's really completing the task in a very efficient way, that means he has problems on this part, his saying part. Similarly if you do not consider his saying, you just observe him, and if you identify he got stuck at particular phase, probably you will have to identify the particular task where actually the person stuck. Similarly, these two things like thinking and feeling is something related to cognitive processing. So if the person thinks bad, or if he feels difficulty while executing any task, then you need to work on the cognitive part of your design. That means you need to make them less processing, that requires less cognitive processing. So you need to work on your design to change um, your design to make them easy to use without uh, utilizing much memory as well as processing of the user. So this is how we do empathy mapping. Okay, and this is not chronological, so there is no particular sequence how we move information here. So this is like a more like a affinity mapping where we dump information under these four categories, and then we try to see, say and think how these are related. We then try to connect say and does, how these are related, then does and feeling, how these are related. So likewise we try to understand various activities and tasks related to these four information. Okay. uh, Another type of mapping is customer journey mapping. So customer journey mapping is again a useful way of mapping processes when you ask a particular user to do particular activity. For example, if a particular activity is switching mobile plans. For example, you have Airtel mobile plans and you always recharge with something like 255 rupees per month. But now you want to change your plan to something different like 480, because because of some reason, like you want more data, or probably there is uh, some competition or some exam coming in where you need to use the data to to gather information for your study. So those can be various reasons where when you want to change your mobile plans. Now if we take this particular task as a activity, so in journey map we try to define the particular process, okay, in visually in terms of four phases, four lanes basically. So we try to define the information about a particular journey or particular process in terms of phases, in terms of actions, thoughts, mindset and emotions. So if we see here, the activity of switching mobile plan involve four phases. Now this is not common to all sort of activities, but for this particular switching mobile plan activity we come across this four set of phases. So very first phase is to define. So within define, the actions that we perform are, we review the current plan. So we review the current plan in terms of its limitation, in terms of the offers it provide. Then we define the parameter for new plan. That means we review the current plan, look for its issues, and we estimate what should be the requirement for the new plan. So that's what we do in a define phase. Now this phase can, the name of this phase can be different for different problem, but for switching mobile plans it is define phase. So we have to define first the parameters of the new plan, and then during this particular phase we need to map our thoughts and mindsets. So we need to bring down the user thoughts. So for example, when you ask someone to do that, the user probably did this set of activities. First he reviewed the current plan and then he identify what would be his requirements, but in order to identify the parameters he might have gone through a set of thought process and emotional changes. So those things also you need to collect and capture here. Similarly, after that, the next phase is to compare. He then, the particular user then probably move to the next page, which is compare, where he watches various probably various here some mistakes, various plans. Okay, he probably watch various plans and then compare Okay, probably he compare against 480 plants, then he compare against 550 plants. Okay, so all this comparison he did in this particular phase. So you write down his activities. So he research about company's offer. Okay, then he use current website tool to compare options. So no, so basically he tries to compare his current plan against various other plans. And then again in that particular stage also you need to map his action as well as thought process. So next phase is negotiate. So probably he calls. So maybe this is the particular way how that particular task flows, defining, then comparing, then he probably talk to the person, probably the Airtel guy. He can talk to the customer care where he negotiate by asking about like what will be the benefit of this particular. He can ask them. Then he ask for particular price. He can ask for his budget, and then probably he will give some idea about, okay, that is the best choice. For example, 480 rupees is the best choice for him because of this sort of provisions or features. So there's a change from what he defined initially as parameters for a new plan, as well as what he finally get bid after negotiating. And the change in his mindset in the terms of actions, or in the terms of thought process and emotions, those also needs to be mapped here. Then finally he select a particular mobile plan and he activate the particular plan. Then he call the customer care service and ask him to switch to this particular service, and he probably pay for that particular service. So during that process also, whatever thought processes, emotions that come across, you need to map those. So this particular way of mapping, which is customer journey mapping, allow you to understand the important phases of activities, the underlying activities or sub activities, then the thought processes or mental emotions or mindset that the user uh, came across in that particular phase, and those also you can record and represent for later inquiry. Okay, so this is very helpful. So empathy mapping allow you to understand the user, his pain points, what he say, what he do, what he see, what he think. Customer journey map let you understand his processes, activities about the specific task. For example, if you hear the mobile phone, similarly you can ask a user to try using the credit card paying facility of Axis Bank. Then probably the way uh, the a user will use that particular mobile bank maybe again divided into 5 or 6 phases, which may be of different level. For example, it will be like opening, then login. So like these are phases. So finally bill, pay bill. You can have authentication. Okay, so these are various phases. Again, task. Again, you can use the mental thought processes and emotions. You can record those across the phases, and this will probably help you uh, to understand the customer journey while executing that particular task, and try to if there are some issues or some negative thought process, then probably you will be able to overcome them by redesigning the website or tool. So that's how customer journey mapping is used. The next is experience mapping. So experience mapping is similar to customer journey mapping, but this is not for one particular user. So experience mapping is more generic in nature. That means it is the common viewpoint about a particular topic area, a particular feature, a particular problem. Okay, so to map, to do experience mapping, you need to collect information from large. So you can actually combine multiple journey maps. Okay, multiple customer journey maps to understand each feature, each particular phases or feature of a bigger system, and then you can combine those individual journey maps to make a overall experience map. So for example, your experience map is will be for Axis Bank mobile app. So you can create a experience mapping. Now before experience mapping, probably you will be creating several journey maps for different features. So bill payment is one feature. Probably you need multiple of journey maps to get some statistically significant information. Similarly, a credit card payment, then a transfer. So all these features are different, and you will be getting different customer journey maps like this. So you will be mapping, and later you get this information collectively to design your experience map. So experience map is again can be defined as a visualization of entire end-to-end experience, which is generic in nature, and it again consists of phases, actions, thoughts, and mindsets. However, the topic it defines is not specific to any task or activity. It is the overall objective, overall description of a scenario or of a phenomenon or a particular application. So this is how it can be designed. So here's an example of a pregnancy scenario. So we are trying to map here the pregnancy condition. Okay, so it can be mapped for conditions, it can be mapped for experiences, it can be mapped for any application uses. So we here we are trying to map the experience of pregnancy. Okay, so pregnancy generally is a trimester, it's like phased, like in the process. So basically there are three uh, phases. Okay, and then you have different set of actions and thought process. Okay, which belongs to each of these uh, s- phases. Okay, so phase wise it has three phases, and then you try to map your these things, your actions. For example, a action can be planning, name generation, maternity leaving plan, then birthing classes. Then action can be sharing. Okay, then experience can be whether your energy is up down. Okay, so you may have different features, so which you are trying to plot whether it goes up or down. So the nature of the data type can be different, but the information has to be experience, activities, as well as emotions or uh, thoughts. Then anxiety level are again parameters. So you have again activities which are like uh, tests, medical tests. So you do urine analysis in the first phase. Then you have anxiety level because of this positive. Then with whom you share. So there is also relationship between these activities. Similarly, in the second stage, what you do. So what are the activities you do as clinical tasks? Then whom you share the information. Okay, then how do you plan? Then what is your physical experience? Similarly, third stage, what are the activity you do? Then with whom you share the information, with whom you plan, so how you plan, and then what is your physical experience. So for different problems, actually, these activities, thought process are going to different. So if it is a mobile phone application, probably these phases will not be like this. So this will be more like uh, big chunks, like um, probably these are phases of using over a month, probably. So probably when salary comes, so to view salary, then probably when after salary comes, you transfer money or deposit or save money, then probably you pay your bills. So this probably will be the typical use cases which are sequential in nature. And then you try to identify what are the various activities, emotions when you do perform these activities. Okay, so these are not specific to particular tasks, products, or services, but a overall understanding of how you perform, or how you experienced a particular phenomenon or particular uses. Okay, so it's not about describing the features of a mobile phone. If we discuss about experience mapping, it is how you use that particular application for yourself over a period of time. Probably it would try to define your actions into different phases. Okay. Uh, the very last technique is called service blueprinting. So service blueprinting is counterpart of customer journey maps. So customer journey maps is basically giving you details about phases as well as details about actions, thought process. However, service blueprint will provide you visual relationship between different service components like people, props, processes. So this is very similar to your flow model or cultural model. However, here we deal with services. So when we talked about user, then we talked about organization, then we talked about service. In order to understand how organization serve a user, we need to map the various interactions, the relationship between various components visually. So that's how we do in service blueprinting. So it has four set of information like the others. So we have customer actions, we have front stage actions, we have backstage actions, and we have support processes. So for example, here's a uh, service which is a appliance retailer. So appliance retailer means you have imagine it's a electrical shops where there are electrical appliances, for example, for cooking or for home automation or home care. And you try to analyze what is their service, uh, overall service for users. Okay. So you will see there that there are backstage actions, then there are front stage actions, then there are customer journeys. Okay. So the customer, these are generally the service are generally categorized either based on time or based on their provisions or facilities. So here, service is categorized based on time. So we have service which are plotted against time and duration. So the customer visit a website. Okay, so this is a front end. So it's a support chat. So here we are trying to map that a customer interact with the particular appliance retailer via a chat box. That's the front end, the front actions, front stage actions, and that's is supported by technology as well as by employee actions. Okay. So this is how front end handles customer inquiries. So customer visits a website. So there are evidence of a website. Then customer moves inside the website. Then he access the website, and there is a supportive chatbot, or not chatbot, like customer employees who are actually dealing with these interactions. And then there's a backstage who respond to these chat questions, and that's how at the initial stage inquiry happens. And in case those chats needs to be stored or recorded for future purpose, then you have again support processes at the back end where you analyze the information, the traffic of particular user. So these are very internal, okay, which are not often visible for the customer at the surface level. Then you have retail locations. Okay, so basically person visits after inquiring in the website, the person visits to particular store, and then he goes. So in the front end there are actually employees who welcome them. Okay. So there is nothing to do in this particular stage where it is just to visit at a particular store. Then the customer journey. This is again the customer journey. We are following the one particular customer journey for doing a set of activities. So these are the phases of uh, customer journey. Then the person do discussion, and he look for features, price, and he talk with these with salesperson. Then at the front end you have inventory who checks for availability, and if it's available, then from the back end those information will be provided to the employee who are at the front end, that okay, these are the information from the store. So likewise, that person, then customer move to make a purchase. Okay, then for purchase he make decisions here. So this particular decision go to point of sale system, and then he provides a particular delivery time, and that particular item can be purchased by the customer. So mapping this set of service, like how a organization operates at the back end, at the front end, as well as at the support end, and how a customer interact with this particular organization or service, this can be done using a service blueprint diagram. So this particular mapping allow you to understand what is the customer journey and how this service move in response to the customer journey. So this is how we do it. There are also different ways. It's not like fixed, like this is how you need to do, but mostly in service blueprinting you follow the phases of customer journey, and accordingly you try to map the front page activities, back page the actions, as well as the supportive processes in organization. Okay, so that's the end of today's class. So if you have any doubts, please feel free to ask. Okay. 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 So this can be also used for mapping customer journeys, as well as mapping your use cases of any mobile application or any sort of UX solutions. So when you talk about trying to navigate through a particular user interface probably you can describe a customer journey in terms of phases of interactions. So how a person move in the process of doing in the process of interacting with a user interface. And then instead of if it is a virtual platform, then there will not be physical stores. So back end probably and front end will be, again, those will be virtual things. So front end will be a server, probably a cloud storage, where probably there can be live people who are actually considering or taking your calls or responding to your queries, or it can be a AI bot who is actually handling your information. But at the backstage, either if it's a AI bot, then you have your machine learning and database or algorithms, and if it is actually a physical person who is behind the particular front end, then probably you will have a customer customer service people who are actually responding to your queries via this particular interface. So this can be used for both physical interaction as well as virtual interactions. Okay. Okay, thank you. The next class will be again next Tuesday. It will be 21 March. Okay, so please be there in the class. Thank you.